I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the notification on my laptop that Tuesday morning. An unscheduled meeting invite from HR, set for 9:17, not 9:15 or 9:30 like any normal person would pick. That odd minute felt intentional, like they wanted to knock me off balance before I even walked in. The subject line read, Q3 Strategic Workforce Restructuring. I stared at it over and over, and the knot in my stomach told me this wouldn't be a good morning. When I stepped into the glass conference room on the 12th floor, sunlight spilled across the gray carpet. Marcus Lyle was already there, eyes glued to his phone, typing as if I didn't exist. Beside him sat Victoria Stone, head of HR, wearing that polished smile that never reached her eyes. A brown leather folder rested neatly in front of her, too neatly to be innocent. I had been with Solaris Dynamics for 11 years. From the early days, when we were just a handful of engineers working out of an industrial park outside Denver, to the years we became a billion-dollar renewable energy giant. I'd been there through every emergency meeting, every sleepless night before a plant launch. But this morning, they weren't looking at me as a colleague. They were looking at me like a number to be erased from a spreadsheet. Marcus spoke first, his voice flat, rehearsed. Clara, thank you for coming. We're in the process of restructuring as we prepare for the upcoming IPO. After reviewing our processes and staffing, we've determined your role overlaps with new functions being implemented. You understand that, right? I waited for the real part. Victoria jumped in, her tone sweet and artificial. We truly appreciate your contributions over the past decade. That's why we've prepared a standard severance package. She slid the folder toward me, gently, as if handing over a birthday card. I glanced inside. 2 weeks' pay, a pamphlet on healthcare coverage, a non-disclosure agreement. In bold print, severance policy, standard package. 2 weeks after 11 years. I looked up. Marcus avoided my eyes, gazing out the window where the solar panels glittered like they were mocking me. I asked, Who's taking over Project Alpha after me? Victoria hesitated, then said, Ethan Lyle will be leading it. He's been shadowing the engineering team for some time. We believe he'll bring a fresh perspective. I almost laughed. Ethan Lyle, Marcus's nephew, a brand new MBA who once asked me if solar panels worked when it rained. And just like that, everything made sense. This wasn't restructuring. This was making room for family. I met Marcus's eyes. You're calling this a business decision? He didn't flinch. You know, it's nothing personal. Nothing personal. The favorite phrase of people who destroy others and still want clean hands. I didn't argue. I just closed the folder and slid it back to them. I'll review it. Victoria smiled. Of course. But we'll need your signature by the end of the day to stay on schedule. I stood, steady. If I understand correctly, you just fired the woman who saved this company from bankruptcy in 2018 and replaced her with your nephew. Marcus didn't respond. Greg will handle your offboarding. We're done here. I walked out, down the long corridor of the building. No one looked at me, though everyone knew. At my desk, I packed what was left: a small potted plant, a team photo, and a chipped Solaris mug. I left my badge on the table and said nothing. When the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the steel panel. Calm, too calm. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. Only silence, heavy and certain, like the air before a storm. They had no idea how many records, contracts, and design files I'd quietly archived over the years. They thought they were dismissing a compliant woman. I watched the elevator lights blink down floor by floor and whispered to myself, they think I'll disappear, but I've never been the kind to leave without reading the fine print. Outside, the Denver wind cut sharply and dry against my collar, carrying that faint metallic scent of autumn. The box in my hands felt lighter than it should, but something inside me grew heavier. Not sadness, but the realization that this story wasn't over. I took a deep breath and smiled faintly. Standard policy, they called it. They were about to learn what standard really means. If you've listened this far, tell me where you're from. New York, Dallas, or maybe an office, somewhere under the same cold fluorescent lights. Drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. And if you believe silence can be the sharpest form of revenge, subscribe and stay tuned. We still have so much more to say about those who think they hold power until the contract says otherwise. I got back to my apartment in Boulder just as the sky turned dark. The place was small, the third floor of an old brick building that faced the mountains, rocky silhouettes fading purple under the last trace of sunset. I set the box down on the floor and sat beside it. Luna, my shepherd mix, who'd been with me for 7 years, trotted over and rested her head on my knee, eyes full of quiet worry, asking what happened. I stroked her fur without a word. I didn't know where to begin. 11 years at Solaris vanished in a few minutes. My company email was locked. My badge no longer worked. All that was left was a faded silver mug, a group photo, and a dying plant. I opened a bottle of red wine, poured it into a glass, and laughed to myself. Maybe I'd known this day would come. No one stays loyal to a company forever, especially one about to go public. But the way they did it, cold, clinical, not even a single sincere thank you, still made me feel erased from my own life. I turned on my personal laptop and opened the old folders I'd kept. I've always had a habit of saving everything: contracts, meeting notes, project plans, even HR updates sent to the wrong distribution list. When you work with systems long enough, you learn one rule: everything leaves a trace. I began reading my very first employment contract, the one I signed in 2012, just to remind myself how hopeful I'd been that day. The paper had yellowed. Marcus's signature still trembled slightly, like he hadn't been sure of his own authority back then. I skimmed through the standard stuff: salary, benefits, vacation days, until my eyes caught something small, italicized, buried halfway down page 6. All unvested shares will immediately vest in full if the employee is terminated without cause. I read it again, then again. My heartbeat quickened. The phrase "without cause" burned in my mind. I replayed the meeting in my head, Marcus's exact words. "We all know this isn't personal. They didn't fire me for misconduct. Not for performance. It was restructuring, which meant without cause. If that clause were still valid, every unvested share would become mine." I pulled up last year's equity plan and did the math: over $8 million. I sat still, the wine glass trembling slightly in my hand. The first feeling wasn't joy, it was disbelief. HR couldn't have missed this. They must have changed the language in later contracts, but I couldn't remember signing a new one. I checked every email, every policy update. Nothing. The only time HR ever mentioned revised terms was during a raise 3 years ago, and I'd declined to sign because it didn't affect my role. I snapped a photo of the clause and sent it to Jamie, a former legal counsel friend. I texted, "Tell me if this clause still stands." Her reply came within minutes: "If you never signed an updated contract, it's valid. They're idiots if they miss that." I stared at the screen, feeling a rush of heat in my veins, not because of the money, but because they thought I wouldn't notice. I opened a browser and searched for employment lawyer, R. Denver, equity clause. Dozens of big firms popped up with glossy logos and empty slogans. Then one name stood out: Ava Kim, independent employment attorney. The site was simple: only one client, quote, "She made my old company wish they'd never messed with me." I saved her number. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and Luna pressed closer to my hand. I whispered, "It's okay, Luna. This is only the beginning." Then I set the glass down, reopened the contract, and photographed every page. I emailed the scans to my backup account and sealed the original in an envelope. When I turned off the lights, the clock read 2 in the morning. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind slide past the window. I thought of Marcus, of Victoria, of that sterile conference room. They wanted me silent, compliant, and willing to sign whatever they handed me. They forgot I was the one who once rewrote their own policies, the one who knew exactly how every line of Solaris documentation was structured. They thought I'd accept defeat. They'd never met a Clara who actually read the fine print. If you've ever lost your job, you know that feeling: a mix of humiliation, anger, and something strangely close to clarity. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and knew that tomorrow would be different. Because this time, they'd just signed their own downfall. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. No Outlook alarms, No urgent meeting requests from Victoria, just the faint morning light slipping through the window and the smell of coffee I'd brewed myself. I sat at the table, staring at the contract folder I'd neatly sealed inside a hardcover. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept running through every possible outcome. If I was right, I could take everything back. If I were wrong, I'd be left with an old contract and another bruise on my dignity. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the number I'd saved the night before. Ava Kim. I hesitated for a few seconds, then hit call. The line rang twice before a woman's voice came through, husky, sharp-edged. Ava here. Who's this? This is Clara Reynolds. I was let go this week. I think HR deliberately ignored an equity clause in my contract. A short pause. Then she said, "Send me the contract. If it's what you think it is, we'll talk." 2 hours later, I drove downtown to her office. It wasn't one of those glass towers like the big firms, but a second-floor suite above a used bookstore. The frosted door bore a small sign, Ava Kim, Employment Law. Inside smelled like coffee and old paper, with the steady hum of a printer in the background. A woman in her 40s, with short hair and navy shirt, glanced up from her papers as I walked in. "Clara Reynolds?" "Yes. Take a seat." "I skimmed your contract. That clause is exactly what HR prays no one ever notices. But you kept the original copy, and you never signed a new agreement. That means it's still enforceable." I looked at her. "You're sure?" Ava smiled faintly, the kind of smile born from too many courtroom wins. "Absolutely. I once used that same clause to make a logistics company pay $4 million. But the real question is, what do you want? Money or a lesson for them?" I paused. Marcus's bowed head flashed in my mind. Victoria's polite fake smile. Ethan's smug look as I left the room. "I want them to understand that my silence isn't for sale, not for 2 weeks of pay." Ava nodded and opened her laptop. "Good. Then we'll be careful. No threats, no noise. We'll use the only language they actually fear, legal." Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, face lit by the glow of the screen. Then she read the draft aloud. "To the Executive Board of Solaris Dynamics. Pursuant to Section 7.3 of the Employment Agreement dated March 12, 2012, all unvested shares belonging to Ms. Clara Reynolds shall immediately vest in full in the event of termination without cause. Accordingly, the company is required to confirm Ms. Reynolds' rightful ownership of said shares and complete the necessary transfer within 10 business days. Any delay or refusal to comply will constitute a breach of contract." Every line was precise, cold, and stripped of emotion. I nodded. "Send it." "Not yet," Ava said. "Before we do, we prepare for their reaction. They'll try to bury this. Claim the clause is invalid, or worse, attack your credibility." I frowned. "You think they'd go that far?" She shrugged. "I've seen it all. When the money's big enough, people will invent any lie to justify their dirt." I stared out the window. Snow had begun to fall, soft and steady. Denver looked beautiful this time of year, but cold in a way that reminded you nothing lasts forever. I exhaled slowly. "They think I'll disappear. I'll make sure they remember me every time they open their equity ledger." Ava smiled. "I like how you think." That afternoon, when I left her office, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Power. Not the loud kind that people like Marcus flaunt, but the quiet, grounded kind, like a current running underground. You can't see it, but it can light up a whole building when the time comes. Back home, I made a cup of tea and opened my laptop. An email from Ava was waiting. Subject line, "Letter ready. Will send at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Get ready to play." I read it again, word by word, then closed my eyes. No more anger, no more fear. Only one clear thought remained. They picked the wrong woman to underestimate. At 8:59 the next morning, I sat in my small kitchen, a cup of coffee cooling on the table, my eyes fixed on the laptop screen. Ava had said she'd send the email at exactly 9 o'clock. Not a minute early, not a minute late. That's the timing of people who know they hold the power, she'd told me the night before, voice steady as steel. 9 o'clock, a soft ping. The subject line appeared, Employment contract, equity vesting clause inquiry. Simple, cold, not a single wasted word. Ava had written it like it was carved in stone. No emotion, only law. Inside, the opening line was sharp and clean. On behalf of my client, Ms. Clara Reynolds, I am submitting this formal request that Solaris Dynamics acknowledge and execute Section 7.3 of the Employment Agreement dated March 12, 2012. This clause clearly states that all unvested shares shall immediately vest in full if the employee is terminated without cause. The ending carried Ava's signature precision, calm but lethal. Please note that any delay or intentional noncompliance may constitute a breach of contract and result in appropriate legal action. We look forward to your response within 10 business days. No threats, no anger, but every word hit like a hammer. Ava didn't use the law to scare people. She used it like a scalpel, cutting clean and deep, leaving the other side bleeding before they even realized it. I stared at the sent email, feeling like I'd just lit a fuse. Ava's words echoed in my head. Don't expect a reply right away. They'll panic, then go silent. That's how you'll know it worked. And she was right. Solaris went silent. Day 1 passed. Nothing. Day 2, I checked my inbox 10 times. Only spam. Day 3, Ava called. Still nothing? I asked. Yep. And I'd bet they're in a crisis meeting right now, she chuckled softly. Clara, don't you see? For people like Marcus, silence is the danger zone. It means they're running around trying to patch the hole. I could picture it. Marcus in a tense boardroom, jacket unbuttoned, hair out of place, Victoria pacing beside him. They'd print out the email, circle words like vested, without cause, breach of contract, and toss it to legal with one order: fix it. But you can't fix what's already signed. That afternoon, a message popped up from an unknown number. Ms. Clara? This is Dan from Solaris Legal. We'd like to schedule a short call to clarify a few details. I smiled. No need to ask what they wanted. Clarify was always code for convincing you to sign something new. I forwarded it to Ava. She texted back instantly. Don't respond. I'll handle it. 3 hours later, she sent me a short note. Solaris requested an off-the-record conversation. They don't want anything in writing that could leak. You think they're scared? I wrote back. No, she replied. They're panicking because they just realized they've lost control of the narrative. That evening, my phone rang again. Jamie, my old friend from legal. Her voice was a whisper. I can't say much, but the office is chaos. Marcus has been in meetings all day, and Victoria's running between HR and legal. Someone found the phrase equity clause error in the original contract file. Turns out no one ever reissued updated contracts for senior employees. You hit the exact weak spot. I leaned back in my chair, listening to my heartbeat slow. I didn't say much, just, thanks, Jamie, be careful. After the call, I opened a new note on my laptop and typed, Day 3, after the legal notice. No response. Signs of internal panic. Counteraction phase imminent. Outside, snow was falling lightly. I stepped onto the balcony, watching the city fade under a thin white sheet. Everything was so quiet I could hear cars in the distance. Silence, as Ava said, is the sound of people preparing their biggest mistake. The next morning, Ava called again. They just hired McHale & Rowe, she said, a hint of excitement in her tone. Crisis management firm. That means they're sealing every crack and they won't stay quiet for long. Get ready, Clara. They're going to fight back. I smiled. You think I'm afraid? No, she said. But remember, this isn't about a terminated employee anymore. It's about power. And you know the most interesting thing about power? Let me guess. It doesn't last. Exactly. That night, I opened my laptop again and reread the contract. Clause 7.3, that italic line I had only ever noticed. Then I sent Ava a few old emails from Victoria, the ones that clearly showed HR had deliberately delayed updating employee agreements. Ava read them and replied with just one line. Perfect. If they hit us, we have ammo. I turned off the lights and leaned back in my chair. No shouting, no confrontation, just a heavy silence, the kind that comes before something breaks. Solaris thought deleting my name from their payroll would erase me. They forgot I never needed a title to exist. All I need is one clause and a better memory than theirs. If you've ever sent an email knowing it would change everything, you know the feeling. It isn't fear or satisfaction. It's the cold, steady calm before the storm you built yourself. They didn't sleep. That's the first thing I learned from Jamie's message. Marcus was calling legal at 2 in the morning. Victoria didn't leave the office for 2 straight days. They hired McHale and Rowe, a powerhouse crisis firm, then a PR company to control the narrative. When people in power start running, you know they're scared. 2 days after Ava's letter, a small tech news site ran a bold, sensational headline. The piece claimed a former project director was under investigation for unprofessional behavior involving internal documents. They quoted an anonymous source saying the person might have leaked sensitive materials. The comments exploded. A few old colleagues messaged to ask if I was okay. I answered, "I'm fine." That was move one. They wanted to shift the story from company error to employee misconduct. If you can make people doubt someone's character, they'll accept whatever explanation the company offers. Victoria is a master at that. She baits the hook and waits for the school of fish to bite. Then Solaris's lawyers called Ava. The tone went polite, professional, quietly threatening. They accused me of leaking internal documents and demanded that Ava withdraw the letter to avoid legal action. The implication was clear: retract, or we'll sue you for encouraging a disclosure. Ava told me what she said, and I laughed over the phone. They don't know who they're talking to, she said. I won't retract. They can sue, but what on earth would they sue over? That they forget to mention the clause? It's absurd for a big company to use the law to hide its own negligence. She sounded bold, but I knew even Ava felt the risk. When big money is involved, people use ugly tactics. Move 2 was more subtle. One night, I got a message from an unusual number. Dan from Solaris Legal invited me to a private meeting, politely worded. I forwarded it to Ava. She replied, "No private meetings. If they want to talk, bring lawyers. There should never be a one-on-one between an individual and a corporation." I trusted her. Then came another hit aimed at flipping the narrative. The next morning, an investment site published a piece accusing a former director of gaming the contract to grab shares ahead of the IPO. The story was sprinkled with tongue-in-cheek jabs about ethics. Investors and analysts started asking questions. A few small funds called Solaris's IR to probe governance risk. Marcus's hands began to shake. They kept piling on. That night, Victoria called a number I used when I still worked there, an intentional move to pull up old comments and use them as bait. An internal email leaked, a chat excerpt was misquoted, and facts were twisted just enough to make me look shady. They tried to soil the story. Then they moved to a tactic I knew well when danger rose: bribery. Ava told me a negotiator named Greg reached out with a private deal: generous advisory fees if Ava would withdraw the letter and handle it internally. They wanted her quiet. They wanted the story buried, and they didn't mind paying to make that happen. Ava asked if I'd accept. I thought of Luna, of the nights hunched over spreadsheets and plans, of Ethan Lyle lounging in his new chair. I answered no. Ava sounded unsurprised. I guessed as much. They don't know who they're dealing with. We don't sell our story so they can sleep easier. One detail made their PR and bribery attempts pointless. I had recorded the termination meeting. I'd saved the call from the conference room, not because I planned to fight, but out of a weird habit of recording when things felt uncertain so I could remember promises later. I never told anyone. The file sat on my phone, a dry recording of Marcus saying this is not for cause, which now sounded like a time-stamped nail. When Ava first heard the recording, her voice changed. She played it, paused, played it again. I could picture her face over the words. They said it themselves, she said. This isn't speculation. This is them, in their own voices. Suddenly, the meeting room wall had more than paperwork. It had testimony. Having the recording was powerful, but it was risky. They could claim it was illegally made, depending on the state, or accuse us of editing. They might try to discredit it. So Ava started building backups, verify the file metadata, timestamp it, store copies in multiple secure locations, and send a sealed copy to a trusted third party. They would have to work very hard to deny it. The fight had changed. They weren't just firing legal shots, they were deploying the whole machine: press, social media, planted doubts, private deals, and bribery. Each strike bought me time to gather more evidence. Every loud attack made me quieter and more deliberate. I listened, waited for the moment to answer with proof they couldn't erase. Late that night, with snow falling on the balcony, Ava texted, "They'll hit hard. Stay steady. We won't react emotionally. We'll respond with evidence." I closed my eyes, hugged Luna closer, and thought of Marcus awake in his office, counting emails and risks. They'd started bluffing. I knew a day would come when I'd call their hand. When that happened, they wouldn't have anywhere left to hide. On the sixth day after Ava sent the letter, an email landed in her inbox. The subject line read, "Request for clarification. Equity clause." Under the signature was a familiar name, Dan Force, CEO of Solaris Dynamics. Ava forwarded it to me with a single note. "They're either about to surrender or preparing their final move. Get ready." We met at a small cafe near the city courthouse. Ava brought her laptop, a thick folder of documents, and the calm face of someone who knows a mistake is about to be made. I asked, "What do you think they'll do?" She took a sip of espresso, eyes on the window. "If they're smart, they'll negotiate. If they're stupid, they'll try to adjust the contract language. Either way, it benefits us." Solaris scheduled the meeting for Friday at their headquarters, the same conference room where they'd fired me. It felt like a full circle. Ava said, "That's intentional. They want to remind you of your weakness." I smiled. "They're bringing me back to the battlefield I built." Before the meeting, Ava prepared every detail with surgical precision. She organized the evidence into sections: the original contract, the termination recording, Victoria's internal emails, and the verified metadata confirming the recording's authenticity. Each set was labeled, color-coded, and tabbed. I asked why she went to such lengths. "Because when they panic, they'll stall," she said. "They'll ask for time to review. I'm not giving them any." That morning, I wore the same black coat I'd worn the day they fired me. Not for nostalgia, but to remember how it felt to be underestimated. When I walked into the Solaris building, the receptionist froze for a second, then nodded politely. I smiled back as if I'd never left. Ava walked beside me, steady and silent. The 12th floor conference room was unchanged. The polished wood table, the glass wall overlooking the mountains, and the fake plant in the corner that Victoria once bragged about, saying it never wilted. Now it was dusty and slightly tilted. Inside sat 6 people: Dan Force, CEO, Victoria Stone from HR, Marcus Lyle, Operations Director, 2 lawyers from McHale and Rowe, and a clerk typing notes. Dan stood when I entered, extending his hand. "Clara, thank you for coming. We want to resolve this professionally." Ava didn't shake his hand. She set the folder down and spoke evenly. "Good. Then let's get to it. Clause 7.3. Full vesting of all shares when terminated without cause. You signed it. Ms. Reynolds was terminated without cause. The shares belong to her. It's that simple." The air in the room tightened. One of the McHale and Rowe attorneys spoke. "We believe that clause was amended in the 2019 contract revision." Ava lifted an eyebrow and opened her laptop, projecting a document onto the screen. "What revision?" "According to HR records, Ms. Reynolds never signed any update. Here's the system log confirming that." She slid a printed copy across the table, marked in red. "And if you're referring to an unsigned draft, you all know that holds no legal weight." Marcus glanced at Victoria, her face pale. Dan leaned forward. "Look, no one here wants this to escalate. We're willing to find a fair solution. There may have been an oversight, or perhaps a misunderstanding in the contract language. I believe we can reach an outcome that satisfies both sides." Ava smiled faintly. "Satisfaction is subjective, Mr. Force. Law isn't. This isn't about feelings. It's about numbers." The Solaris attorney spoke quickly, controlled. "The company is prepared to offer a settlement equivalent to the current value of the shares, plus 10%, in exchange for closure." Ms. Reynolds would sign a non-disclosure and waive any further claims. I looked at Ava. She gave me a small nod. I turned to Dan. I don't need hush money. I want what I was promised. My shares. If you're worried about this affecting your IPO, remember I have the right to attend as a shareholder. And if necessary, I'll speak before the board. Victoria's voice trembled. Clara, don't do this. You know this could destroy everything we've built. I looked at her. We ended the day you handed me that severance envelope with a smile. Ava opened her laptop and pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room. Clara, this isn't personal. The restructuring isn't related to your performance. The silence that followed was absolute. That same smooth, detached tone was now irrefutable proof they had fired me without cause. One of the McHale and Rowe lawyers jumped in. This recording is inadmissible without prior consent. Ava didn't blink. It's admissible. Colorado is a one-party consent state. Ms. Reynolds was part of the conversation. It's legal. Dan exhaled, slow and heavy. We understand. Give us a few days to review our position. Ava closed her laptop. No need. We'll send a final notice within 24 hours. If the transfer isn't complete by then, we'll file for full legal action, including an audit of 10 years of equity and HR practices. I'm sure you don't want that in your IPO report. The smile drained from Dan's face. You're blackmailing us. Ava stood, voice calm. No, I'm reminding you to honor the contract you signed. As we walked out, afternoon light spilled through the glass, turning the hallway the color of steel. I paused at the elevator, glancing back at the open door of the conference room. Inside, Marcus stared down. Victoria sat wordless, and Dan gripped his pen so hard his knuckles turned white. Ava whispered as the elevator doors closed. They've already lost. They just don't know it yet. I looked into the mirrored panel. This time, I didn't see the woman who'd been fired. I saw the one in control. And if Solaris still didn't understand, they soon would. Some clauses aren't meant to be ignored. We left the Solaris headquarters just as the rain began to fall. The drops were heavy, cold, rhythmic, hitting the pavement like a somber metronome. Ava drove in silence, her eyes fixed on the gray curtain of water ahead. I sat beside her, my hand still gripping the folder tight, the rush of adrenaline refusing to fade. What do you think they'll do? I asked, my voice hoarse. They'll panic, then look for a way out, Ava said. But they don't have many. Everything leaves a trace, Clara. And today they learned we found every one of them. I leaned back and watched the traffic slide past through the rain. Marcus's voice echoed in my head, his words from the recording, the moment he said, "There's nothing personal here." Back then, he thought he was softening the blow. Now, that same sentence was strangling the very system he'd built. 3 days later, Ava texted me. They're quiet. That means they're calculating. Get ready for the storm. She wasn't wrong. On the fourth morning after the meeting, an email from Solaris arrived in her inbox. Short, stripped of formality. We do not recognize the legal validity of the recording, nor do we acknowledge that Clause 7.3 remains in effect. Ava called me as soon as she read it. Good, she said. This is exactly the reaction I wanted. Good, I repeated. They're denying everything. Exactly, Ava replied. When they deny, it means they've abandoned negotiation, which means we escalate. That day, Ava filed the lawsuit with the Denver District Court. She attached every piece of evidence, the original contract, the recording, Victoria's emails, and the system logs proving no new contract was ever signed. I read the complaint. Clean, surgical, not a single wasted word. The final line read simply, "The plaintiff requests that Solaris Dynamics fulfill the contractual clause in full and compensate for damages caused by failure to perform." That night, Ava sent another message. I've delivered a copy to their counsel. Now we wait. And waiting, in this case, didn't mean peace. 2 days later, the calls began. Unknown numbers. When I answered, there was only breathing or silence before the line cut. One night, an anonymous email arrived. Stop digging. Solaris doesn't lose. Ava glanced at it and said, Don't worry, just noise. When they lose control, they get stupid. She was right. The following week, McHale and Rowe filed a motion to delay the case, claiming they needed more time to gather internal documents. But Ava had anticipated that. She sent the court a log of every previous delay Solaris had made, along with proof of their smear campaigns. The motion was denied. Then the press caught scent of blood. A business reporter from the Denver Journal reached out, saying they'd heard Solaris was facing a shareholder dispute that could derail its IPO. I declined to comment. Days later, the article dropped anyway. The headline screamed across the page: Former employee accuses Solaris of equity breach. McHale and Rowe enters the fight. That's when I knew the story had grown beyond their control. Once investors start to doubt, no legal team can contain the fire. Marcus called me. His first call since the day he fired me. Clara, he began, his voice strained. I know you're angry, but you don't understand. We were following the board's direction. No one wanted to hurt you. I paused. When I was in that conference room, did you tell them I didn't deserve it? He didn't answer. You knew that clause existed, didn't you? You reviewed the contract before you signed my termination. Silence. I can't say anything more, he said quietly. Things are complicated, but if you withdraw the case, I can guarantee a private settlement, bigger than the shares. I laughed softly. You still don't get it, Marcus. I don't want your money. I want the truth. I want fairness. After the call, Ava said flatly, They're breaking. When the CEO calls personally, legal's already lost. They're looking for an exit. Then she adjusted our strategy. We're not just demanding your shares anymore, she said. We're demanding that Solaris disclose all equity clauses for former employees. If they're forced to publish that, others will realize they were cheated too. I understood. My case was no longer personal. It was the spark for something larger, and it didn't take long. 3 days later, Jamie texted me. Emergency meeting on the 15th floor. CFO lost it. Slammed the table. Rumor says Victoria's suspended. Everyone's talking about the Reynolds clause. I stared at the message for a few seconds. The Reynolds clause, a new name, born from one small italic line I'd once reread in the middle of the night. Now it was the symbol of a corporation's arrogance, the belief they could erase me with a severance check. That evening, Ava emailed, Brace yourself. When they know they can't win, they'll ask for one last meeting, and this time you'll be the one who sets the price. I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer on the wet pavement. The rain had stopped, but the streets still gleamed. I thought about the years I gave to Solaris, the nights rewriting code, fixing budgets, saving the company from collapse. They'd forgotten all of it, but I hadn't, and this time I would remind them, not with words, but with numbers they could never erase. A week later, when the media storm began tearing through Solaris, I got the call Ava had predicted. This time, it wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Victoria. It was Dan Fork, the CEO himself. His voice was rough, dry, the sound of someone who hadn't slept in days. Clara, I want to settle this, he said. No courts, no press. We can meet directly, you and your attorney. I think you want this to end too, don't you? I didn't answer right away. On the other end, I could hear him breathing, slow and tired. I said, I'll let Ava arrange it. And Dan, if you're still planning to use any dirty PR tricks, don't bother. No one believes Solaris is clean anymore. The meeting was set for Monday morning, in the same building, but a smaller room. Just one long table and warm yellow light. No legal entourage. No board members. Just Dan, a quiet assistant, and Ava beside me, her laptop already open. Dan looked nothing like the man I'd faced before. His suit was wrinkled, his collar open, eyes bloodshot. The confidence of a CEO preparing for an IPO was gone. What remained was someone clinging to the last fragments of control. He started bluntly. I'm not denying mistakes were made, but we're in a critical phase. If this spreads any further, the entire company will take the hit. I want to resolve this quietly. Tell me your number. I studied him for a moment, then glanced at Ava. She gave a small nod, letting me speak. I don't want a payout, I said. I want my shares vested, as stated in the contract. All of them. And I'm not signing an NDA. Dan frowned. You know that's nearly impossible. If you keep those shares, you'll have voting rights. Once the IPO happens, You'll be a major shareholder. You're asking for power, not fairness. Ava cut in, her voice sharp as glass. No. Ms. Reynolds is asking for what your company promised, and you signed. The fact that those shares give her power is a legal outcome, not manipulation. If you don't want employees with power, stop letting them sign smarter contracts than you. The room went still. Outside, the wind howled against the glass. I could feel him calculating, measuring every option. Finally, he said, "If I agree to vest all shares, can you guarantee this ends here?" "I'm not suing for money," I replied. "But if you hide anything again, I'll tell everything." Ava turned her laptop toward him. On the screen were Victoria's old emails from 2 years ago. Messages instructing HR to delay updating equity terms for senior staff. Proof that Solaris had deliberately kept employees uninformed to save money. Dan stared at the screen, his expression darkening. "I didn't know about this," he muttered. "Now you do," Ava said softly. Silence stretched almost a full minute. Then Dan lifted his head, his tone clipped, resigned. "We'll vest all remaining shares. Ms. Reynolds will receive full legal ownership and shareholder certification. But I need your assurance this is the end." I met his eyes. "I won't go. Public if you follow the law. But Solaris will send a formal notice to all employees disclosing the forgotten equity clause. Everyone deserves to know." He closed his eyes for a second, then nodded. "Agreed." Ava tilted her head, typing quickly. "We'll need a signed document from both the CEO and CFO, delivered within 48 hours." The meeting ended in silence. As we walked out, midday light spilled across the corridor. I felt like I was breathing for the first time in months. Ava walked beside me, calm and steady. She tapped my shoulder lightly. "You made them admit it, Clara. Not through anger, through reason. That's the cleanest revenge there is." 2 days later, Ava sent me the final document. Solaris confirmed my shares were fully vested and that my name was now listed among active shareholders. I read the bolded line, "Effective immediately, all unvested shares of Ms. Clara Reynolds are now vested and owned in full." I didn't laugh, I didn't cry, just an odd stillness spreading through me. I texted Ava one line, "Thank you. I'll handle the rest." That night, I opened my laptop and logged into the Solaris shareholder portal. Next to the big names, Dan Fork, Marcus Lyle, the major investors, there it was, Clara Reynolds, shareholder. Not italicized, not hidden. I closed the screen and looked out the window. The city lights burned bright, but what I felt was something quieter, the silence of justice. No applause, no headlines, just the certainty that for the first time in years, I'd won. And this time, no one could ever erase my name from the system again. 3 months after that meeting, Solaris Dynamics held its grand IPO ceremony in San Francisco. Banners hung across the glass towers, reporters crowded the front steps, and the executives looked like men freshly baptized in stock options. I watched the live stream from my apartment, coffee in hand, not as an employee, but as a shareholder. My name sat on the official listing, public and permanent. No one could erase it. Ava texted me a single line, "They owe you a lesson in arrogance." She was right. After the settlement, Solaris was forced to disclose every equity clause in employee contracts. Within weeks, dozens of people began checking their own files. Some found the same buried terms, and one by one, they demanded their rights. Inside the company, people started calling it the Reynolds effect. I didn't answer interview requests. I didn't talk to the press. I didn't need to. Everything was already clear. They lost, not because I had more power, but because they underestimated someone who knew the law better than they did. One morning, Jamie texted me, "Victoria's out. Marcus resigned. Dan's still there, but the board's slowly forcing him to hand control to the investors." I replied, "Everything's back where it belongs." That afternoon, I stopped by Ava's office. She sat behind a pile of case files, looking tired but smiling when she saw me. "You here to share good news?" she asked. "I came to say thank you," I said, "and to ask, if someone wanted to buy back shares from the same company that once fired them, is that legal?" Ava laughed. "Playing the long game, huh?" "Not revenge," I said. "Just investment." Solaris might rise again. I just want to make sure that if they fall, this time I'll be standing, not lying on the floor. Ava's grin widened. Legal and brilliant. That night, I opened an investment account and bought a small portion of Solaris stock on its first day of trading. Not much, just enough to make a point. I was no longer the one who got fired. I was part of the system they once thought they owned. Soon after, I moved out of Denver. A small apartment in Santa Fe, quiet, sunlit, peaceful. I started consulting for startups, teaching them how to read their contracts, how to protect their rights before signing anything. For the first time in years, I felt free. One day, I received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a plain white card with a handwritten line. We learned our lesson. Thank you for reminding us that contracts aren't just paper. Signed, Solaris Legal Team. I folded the card and tucked it into my desk. I didn't need an apology, just acknowledgement. That night, I stepped out onto the balcony with a cup of tea. The city lights flickered in the distance, reflected in my eyes. I thought about everything that had happened, the meeting, the clause they'd ignored, the empire that had to bow to a single line of text. I never wanted to destroy Solaris. I just wanted them to see what I once saw in them, their own blind arrogance. And when they finally looked, they changed. I opened my laptop and checked the shareholder dashboard. The numbers glowed green, Solaris stock up 8% after day one. I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of balance restored. My story didn't end with a courtroom triumph or a viral headline. It ended in silence, with a woman sitting alone at night, looking at a screen, knowing she'd reclaimed everything on her own terms. And maybe that's the kind of justice people remember the longest. I closed the laptop, watching the screen light fade across my face. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the balcony railing, just enough to stir the branches. Maybe justice in this world isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet like this, a person standing up, reading the fine print, and refusing to let anyone step on their silence again. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to ask, which moment made you stop the longest? Was it when I was fired in that cold conference room, or when I saw my name on the shareholder list? Leave a comment below. I read every one. And if you believe in stories where justice is earned through intellect instead of noise, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the quietest battles are the ones that echo the loudest. Thank you for listening.